and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. Hey guys, welcome back. I feel like I need to say welcome because I was just on Christmas break and this is the first episode I'm recording in the new year. So welcome back, at least from my perspective. And I hope you all had a good Christmas break and you're starting 2026 strong. I'm going to be talking a bit about some board meeting logistics today, but first I wanted to tell you quickly about a couple of shifts I'm making on my website, which I have recently revamped, and a couple of new offerings. I am wrapping up this month the Build It course, which follows on the Plan It course on my website. I'm hoping to have that up by the end of January. Those are pre-recorded, and you can just purchase those and do them on your own. So now I'm shifting into 3 new services that I'm really excited about. One of them, the primary one, probably because it's a good place to start, is like a health and sustainability review. And there's going to be 2 levels of that. Go to my website, read a little bit more about it on the services page. But it's basically a snapshot where I can objectively look at where you are in your program. If you're still building, you're in the middle of some growth, you're feeling some tension, whatever, and do some evaluating for you and give you some feedback on ways to make things work smoother and all of that. Another is a founder advisory, which was a longer term relationship, which I'm also very excited about because I really enjoy working on a longer term with founders and helping them reflect with their programs. And the third is a board and governance training session. So go to my website and check those out. And I just wanted to tell you about those because those will be the focus for this year. But let's talk about board meeting logistics, okay? I will tell you that when I first started with board meetings, one, I didn't really understand what we were supposed to be doing in board meetings. I didn't really understand what nonprofits, were supposed to do. And I've talked about this in other episodes as far as like governance and operations and just like what the purpose is. But there was also just the practicality of like how you run a meeting. So I wanted to talk about some of that. And I don't think it's at all uncommon to have, a group of people sit down in a room and they say, okay, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to like call the meeting to order? Are we supposed to like say all in favor, say aye, and then everybody votes? What are we supposed to do? It's not uncommon for a group of people who are like, okay, sure, I'll be on your board, to not really know what that is supposed to look like, okay? There's like Robert's rules and, different things you can look at. But I just want to talk about some of that, as well as some of the like before and after things that should be happening in board meetings, calendar schedules, okay? So just like logistical things. Okay, so for the big picture, like how you format your meetings over a year, say, if you start from that bigger picture, like what needs to get done in a year, because there's usually a cyclical nature to some of the governance and compliance stuff, that can help you zero in on what each part of the year is going to cover, as well as like how many meetings you feel like you need to have. Now, sometimes when you're having too many meetings, like, well, we have to have one every single month. Sometimes you do that because you're getting blurred a little with your operations, or, and this is okay, don't feel bad about this, if you feel like, well, these are the only people I have to help me build this, I don't have staff yet, right? But let me still tell you how you can get help from people, your board members, even if you want help with operations without blurring the lines too much, okay? So anyway, you want to look at your full year. So what you want to do is first build out a calendar of the things that have to be done as far as compliance. You're going to have taxes that need to be submitted once a year. You're probably going to have some state paperwork. This depends on your state, that needs to be submitted once a year. You should be doing some sort of financial, like transparency, internal audit sort of thing from the beginning once a year, if not twice a year. Okay. You should be doing some sort of strategic plan, even if it's just a short something. It might be a bigger project. It might be a smaller project. It depends on where you are in your process, but you should make it a habit to have your strategic plan built out and revisited every year. You want to at least revisit it every year. Okay. You should be reviewing your bylaws. You should have some sort of onboarding and training for new board members. And you want to also do a planning budget every year that is, first it has to get planned and then it has to get reviewed and approved. Okay, so you've got some compliance stuff with your state paperwork. So find out when that's due. And it might depend on, when you establish what your fiscal year is as far as your taxes and that kind of thing. And then you just kind of build from that year down to probably 4 to 6 meetings. Okay. I'd recommend starting at just 4 to 6 board meetings. So that's every, 2 to 3 months. And you have a focus for each one. And this will at least give you a primary focus so that you're not just kind of like making it up as you go. Okay. And you can also give this to your board members. And if you're just in the very beginning when you're first recruiting people, it's really going to help them know what they're signing up for. If you can say, like, we're going to have 6 meetings and we're going to be focused on these things. And, this is how it's going to go. Okay. So let's say you have 2-year board terms. But I wouldn't recommend, if everybody wants to only serve 2 years, then you don't want to have everybody replacing at exactly the same time. So I would recommend that every year you have a set time of the year where you go recruit new board members, whether that's actively reaching out and asking people or having some sort of application that you send out, but you make it known that you're going to be recruiting new board members. I would highly recommend some sort of form application asking, why they're interested, what their experience is, all that kind of thing, kind of vetting who people are. And then have a meeting where the current board members actually review those applications and possibly invite, you might have a committee review them and then invite the candidates to just come into a part of the meeting just so you can meet them. Or you can do that later. There's a couple ways you can do it, but put it on the schedule. Okay. And then you would have to vote those members in and then have a start date where they start their term. So it might be like July and then they serve for two years. Okay. And then you also want to have some sort of self-evaluation of your board. And you also need to have an evaluation and kind of a revisit of whatever those executive positions, staff positions are that the board is overseeing. I jumped from the self-evaluation of the board. You have a time of the year where a portion of your meeting, and this isn't your entire meeting, it shouldn't take your entire meeting, but you're making sure that it's getting done. We've got a couple new applicants. We're going to look through their applications. Anyone have any concerns? Does anybody think one of these people would be a really great fit? Maybe you have a committee who just meets outside of the board meeting just that once a year. Maybe the executive committee, which is the officers, and they just maybe meet with the person or they just review the applications, whatever. It's probably not going to be a ton. It's probably only going to be a couple. This is for the board members. Okay. And you might do that at the same time every year. This is just what happens. Okay. So that's one of the things. And then another portion of the year, you might, maybe 6 months later, right? So that you can evaluate some of the new members, but they've been there for a while. You do a self-evaluation where everyone should come in prepared with a form that they evaluate themselves and they evaluate the other members of the team. Do they participate in meetings? Are they showing up? Are they doing what they said they would do in between meetings? Are they participating as far as sharing their thoughts and their feedback, or do they just sit there quietly the whole time? Are they respectful and kind to the other members? Are they participating in committees? Okay, it's not super, super complicated. It's just basic, are you doing what you're supposed to do as a board member? And you do it for yourself and for the other members. And then you have a meeting where you take some time to talk about that. It's really important to do that proactively because it's awkward and difficult to do it reactively if you're having a problem with somebody. you might still have to do that. But by knowing that that accountability is going to be put in place, it really helps. And knowing that there's a time on the calendar where there's a portion of a meeting set aside to go over those evaluations and give feedback, it really just helps set the culture for clear communication and accountability. So make sure that that is at least a portion of one of your meetings. Now, again, it doesn't have to be the entire meeting, which gets to how long meetings are. 2 to 3 hours is probably normal, especially if you're only having like 4 a year. You might have to do 3 hours. It's difficult to get through all of the things that you need to get through in less time than that, unless you are having monthly meetings, but then it's too easy to get into operations. So it might be best to do 6 meetings, especially when you're first maybe establishing or you're going through a growth period, 6 meetings a year, and have them be like 2.5 hours long. Okay, so your calendar, you're going to have your onboarding, you're going to have your evaluation, your board members. Make sure that you put that on a date. So just sit down with a calendar and write down, this is when we review board member applications. This is when we do evaluations for our board. Okay, now you also need to evaluate, assuming you've already appointed, that has to happen first at some point, your executive staff. Okay, now remember, this is only the person who is then trusted with all the rest of the hiring. You're not micromanaging this person. You're not making decisions with this person. All you're doing is evaluating to make sure that they are, one, equipped and resources to do their job well. They're getting paid. They have a job contract. They know what their job description is. They know what they're trusted with. Okay. They know what they're supposed to be doing. So they have a clear job description. This is very important. Also, if you have 2 staff members, like maybe co-founders or something, where maybe one's more administrative and one's more program or whatever, like you want to make sure that you sit down, make sure you understand what they understand, you understand, everybody understands what each of those people is supposed to be doing. Make sure their paycheck is set, make sure everything is taken care of. Do they have all their paperwork in place too? Sometimes they forget about that because they're so busy taking care of everybody else, right? And then you should also be doing, as a board, an evaluation of them once a year. And this it would be a little difficult to do a whole evaluation in like one board meeting, just sit down and like, you don't want to put them on the hot seat or something. It's not a very good way to do it. But you might, again, have your executive committee, or if you have any kind of HR experienced person on your board or on your staff, do some kind of 360 review that gets sent out to staff, families, board members. A self-evaluation, again, is good. Something like that. It might involve like an overview of the programming by one of the board members, just to like, again, this is just to make sure that the staff member, this one staff member, is doing their job and sticking to the mission. Okay. So imagine a lot of times what happens is like the founder is the one who started the mission, right? And then they end up being the director. And they're kind of like doing all the things. They know everything. They're telling the board what to do, right? But what if, and this is why it's so important that you as a board understand governance, right? What if they moved away and you had to hire a new director for the program who was not the founder? Okay. How would you make sure that person understood the mission, delivered on the mission, did their job well, was accountable, was getting paid, wasn't going to leave in 2 months? And how would you take care of that person to make sure that the mission was accomplished? That is your job as a board. That's the governance job. Okay. So you have to hire someone who knows what they're doing, who's qualified. You got to make sure that they're taken care of and that they're evaluated. Are they sticking to the curriculum? And if that's part of your mission, are all the safety pieces in place? And you might have them submit a summary to you as part of the evaluation or whatever. Okay, so there's a bit of a process. Like you're not going to have that just one meeting where you do all of this in 2 hours, right? But you're going to have some prep, but put it on the calendar. This is when the evaluation is done. There's going to be a little prep going into it. Maybe those 360 reviews, maybe submitting some prep work or something like that. It shouldn't be a huge ordeal. You don't want this to be burdensome for anybody. It just needs to get done. So put it on the calendar as one of the meetings. And then at the meeting, one of your agenda items that is probably going to take, an hour or so is to go over that and reflect. And if there needs to be any follow-up, like the person is burning out or they're under-resourced or like, you guys didn't give me a contract last year, or I'm not getting paid nearly enough for how much I'm working, or maybe they're actually just not doing the job well or something and there needs to be follow-up. You push that to another follow-up meeting. You might have to have some extra if it's, an emergency or something. But Right now, you just have a yearly cycle where that gets done. Okay, so we talked about the board, onboarding, and training. I didn't say training, but that's part of onboarding, okay? But you have to make sure they have the bylaws, the new people, they have the bylaws, they have a board training of some kind, so they know what they're getting into and what they're doing, okay? Evaluating the board. Then we talked about the executive director. You're appointing them once. Hopefully you're not doing that every year. You're appointing them once. That's a project that needs to happen. And then you're evaluating them every year, okay? That's on your calendar as something to do. Like I said, compliance. That should probably only be once a year, where you sit down and you make sure the documents are in order, what needs to happen to make sure the tax documents are in order. Is the bookkeeping, I'm not going to get too far into this because this is some of your other meetings and possibly your financial committee, probably. But what the board itself is supposed to be doing is once a year, all of those board members should make sure that, are the taxes done? Who's doing them? Is the accountant getting back to the person? The treasurer is probably signing the document, the tax document that gets submitted. It's hopefully being prepared by an actual accountant, but you're making sure that it's getting done. And sometimes this can be confusing because it is operational to actually do it. Okay, so there should be somebody on staff who's getting paid to do the bookkeeping and make sure that this all gets submitted to an accountant and communicates with the accountant and probably even looks over the actual form. But because it is a compliance and financial thing, the board treasurer, at the very least, the board treasurer should know enough to look over that form and say, yes, this all looks consistent with what our financial committee has looked at a couple times this year as far as where our expenses are going and how much people are getting paid and all of that. They should be able to look through it, and donations, fundraising stuff, anything like that. They should know enough about the finances to be able to look through that form and say, yep, this looks good, and then put their signature to it and it gets sent in, okay, to the IRS. The compliance stuff is usually fairly simple, but you want to make sure that the board, especially the officers, but the whole board, understand that this paperwork needs to get in, right? The charitable contributions form, if you need one in your state and you're eligible for that, can be probably something the accountant can help fill out because it's not super simple if you have to fill out the whole thing. File for charitable solicitation has to get submitted every year by a certain time, or you can get in trouble if you're doing large amounts of fundraising and donation, collecting donations and grants and stuff, and you don't have that filed. That comes back to you guys as the board. So you as a board need to make sure that's on the calendar. Did this get filed? What's involved? And don't make the mistake, board members, please don't make the mistake of showing up to the meeting, looking at the agenda and saying, oh, did this get done? It didn't get done. And the founder or the director is saying, well, I did it. I did it all by myself and nobody else looked at it. And I did it last minute because I thought the treasurer was going to do it and then the treasurer didn't do it, right? This kind of thing can happen sometimes. It's common because, again, if the board members show up at the meeting, but then they don't actually read the things or do the things they said they're going to do between the board meetings, which is a common issue because board members are volunteers and they're busy people, right? But this is a serious commitment. So you have to make sure that you help the person who's the staff member and make sure they're not getting overburdened by something that really should be a shared responsibility. Like I said, sometimes it's gray and confusing because if it is a lot of work and it's time consuming and you don't have anyone to do it on your staff, the board should really be helping with it. But it can also be operational in the sense that if you have a staff member who does budgeting and bookkeeping and all of that, they can actually fill out the form or work with the accountant to fill out the form. Okay, but somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to sit there and answer all the questions and fill in the form, okay? So it's like an operational thing to do that can be given to the operations, but it's the board's responsibility. So they need to make sure that it's getting done. They need to be supportive of it, and they need to do the work that needs to be done to make sure it happens without undue burden on a staff member who's like, oh no, this business is going to be illegal, and I thought the treasurer was going to do it and the board was going to do it, and now I have to do it. That's wears on directors and staff members who aren't getting the support that they really should be getting from the board in those areas, okay? Okay. But there's also, sometimes there's an annual report that goes to your state with any changes of officers for your board or something like that. You got to know what your state requires, and you need to make sure that those get put on the calendar. Did it get done? Did it get signed? Did it get reviewed? Did it get sent in? Okay. That's your job as a board. It's not the director's job. Okay. Now, the last thing is the strategic planning. Okay. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about meetings. Might be a few more extra minutes here in this episode. The strategic planning is the other thing. And don't get bogged down in that word because that phrase, I guess, because strategic planning can be a big deal, but it doesn't really have to be, because all it really means is the organization stable, is sustainable, or are they just reactively kind of winging it year to year? Okay. Why is this the board's responsibility? Because their responsibility is to protect the mission. Okay. So they should be doing some sort of planning as far as where are we going to be in the next year? Where are we going to be in the next 3 years? Are we going to be able to continue to deliver on our mission? Are we going too fast? Are we not growing enough? Are we in a shaky relationship with a building where we're going to get kicked out or something? They should know what the situation is as far as those things are. How do you know? Well, you do some sort of strategic plan where you get input from the families, from the facility, from the donors, from the staff. Okay. You get input from them on a fairly regular basis through a survey or a meeting or something like that. You find those pressure points before they become a huge problem, hopefully, and you just have a proactive, like, okay, these are things that might affect our mission and our sustainability as an organization. It could be something like our staff we have a high turnover rate because everyone feels like they're getting paid a quarter of what they deserve to get paid for their time. Okay, and we had good people and then they left because they weren't making nearly enough money. Or, the facility is always making us feel like we're walking on eggshells and we don't know what to do about it. Okay, you need to figure those things out before, get that feedback, and then prioritize a couple of things, 3, 4, 5 things at the most, and have a short-term, smart goals, and make sure that you have a timeline, and then you know who's actually going to carry it out and when they're going to carry it out. So it might be, okay, we need to have a meeting with the facility. A couple of our board members are going to go. A couple of our staff members are going to go. And we're going to sit down and just figure out what's going on with this, whether this is sustainable, whether it's going to last. Maybe that's one of the things you have to do if that's a pain point. Okay, we're going to look at our budget and we're going to figure out how we can pay our people more or show them more appreciation or both. Okay, so we have lower staff turnover if that's one of the problems. Okay, so that's your plan. That's what your plan looks like. The board is responsible for that. Again, because they are responsible for the mission of the organization and the sustainability of the organization. They should be financially stable and they should be structurally stable. The pieces should be in place. And again, I keep saying this, I can't say it enough. It can be a little confusing. Sometimes you say, well, some of that is operational. The playing out of the details is often operational, but the actual oversight of whether or not it's happening, the accountability, that should be the board. Okay. Now, some of this stuff can be done by committees, right? And that's in between meetings. And you should have at least one board member on every committee. And you don't need a whole bunch of committees. You might just need a couple. And they might meet a couple extra times per year to focus on specific things. So you might have a finance committee that the treasurer's on, and a couple, maybe 1 or 2 staff members, maybe somebody who didn't want to be on the board, but they're an accountant or a financial person, and they're willing to just come to a couple of financial committee meetings. And that committee is, reviewing the checkbooks, looking at the statements, making sure they know where the money is going, doing a planning budget every year. That could be done by a committee, but then the board who creates the committee and then trusts them to do that, they can report back to the board every year and say, okay, here's our planning budget. Here's how we came up with it. Here's a quick summary. They should send it ahead of time. I'm just going to talk about that in just a second. They're going to send it ahead of time so everyone hopefully actually reads it before the board meeting. They're going to give a quick summary of it, and then it should get approved by the entire board. But the work of actually building the budget is probably largely going to be operational, but then it's going to be done in collaboration with the finance committee and then approved by the board. Okay. So you're going to have these 4 to 6 main things that have to get done every year in your board meetings. And then you're going to have a couple of committees that fill in for some of the stuff that takes a little more time, like getting new board members and meeting them, but doing that planning budget and the financial transparency stuff. And then anything else that might be, maybe you need to develop a better safety plan for your building, or develop a couple new policies. So you might have just an ad hoc committee of a couple board members who say, this is a gap. We need to make sure that this is taken care of. So they have, an ad hoc committee for a couple months, and they put in a little extra time to help develop those things. Okay. So you can start from that, and you can just sit down with a calendar for the year, and you can assign each meeting a different focus. Okay. Now, what does a meeting actually look like? All right. One, your secretary should be putting together an agenda before the meeting. Okay. Now, where do they get this agenda? They should be getting it probably from the director, who probably will be at meetings. They should be at meetings, even though they might not be a voting member. If they're paid staff, that's best practice, but it's okay if they are a paid member. Anyway, I won't talk about that too much right now, but it's probably the director. They're going to know what needs to be talked about. But the president of the board should be the one who understands what that whole year looks like. Okay, so they should be maybe having the outline of the agenda. Here's what each meeting is going to look like. And for the year, here's what our basic board cycle of compliance stuff looks like. So each meeting is assigned that main task. The board president should know that. The director shouldn't have to do that. The board president should be the one. Okay, but they often are working closely together. They're submitting this to the secretary. Okay. The secretary is making sure it's all organized, and they email it out to all the board members at least a week in advance. Okay. And they say, please review this before the board meeting. And then everyone should review it before the board meeting. Okay. Now, when you actually sit and start a board meeting, the president should be conducting the board meeting. Okay. So they should be the one saying, okay, we're going to get started now. I'm calling the meeting to order. And I know a lot of times, like when you're first starting, you feel awkward doing this, and everyone kind of, giggles or whatever, depending on your personality, but just do it. Okay. Just do it. The board president should start on time. Okay. And we're calling the meeting to order. I'm calling the meeting to order. We're going to get started now. We're going to try to be done no later than 9:30 or whatever. And maybe you're starting at 7:00. Okay. And a lot of times it's nice to start with a little missional moment or heart-to-heart sort of thing, where you give a story of a kid or a family or something to make everybody remember why it is they're there. That can be a nice way to start. Okay. And then I don't think it's a bad idea at all to have a little accountability about whether people actually read the agenda. Okay. Did you guys all get to review the agenda? Did anyone have any questions? We're going to get started with the first item. And then you then move through the agenda. Okay. And some of it might just be summaries. You might have a committee who says, oh, we had a meeting, we went through this and that. Here's what we talked about. Here's our recommendation. Okay. You have a spokesman for the committee. They know that they're going to be presenting because it's on the agenda. Not presenting in some big formal way, probably, but just here's what we did. We developed a safety plan. We talked about this and that. We feel like we're 90% there, and we'll have the plan. We'll email it out to you guys next week, or here it is, or whatever. Okay. So anything on the agenda should get gone through in an orderly way. You want to try to get through all of your items. It might take a little trial and error to figure out how much time these things take, but a really big key is, again, the president needs to make sure that there's order kept. Don't get into the weeds. And if that happens, the president should be the one to call it back. If you're getting into things that either, one, the board shouldn't be talking about because it's not really their business, okay, or it's just taking way too long, you have to use some discernment about, how urgent it is. It's okay to kind of set that aside and say, okay, let's add this to the meeting minutes, which the secretary is taking, right? They're sitting there typing and they're writing all the main points. Okay, we're going to add this to the agenda. We're going to have to talk about this. If it's not urgent, maybe the next board meeting, maybe you have to have a special board meeting, maybe you pass it on to a committee. Okay, or maybe you say this is operational, this should go to the staff. I'll keep in touch with them and they'll get back to me. All right, so you stay in order. You might even have time, like we're going to spend 30 minutes on this, 30 minutes on this, spend an hour on this, okay? And try to stick to it as much as possible. If people aren't speaking up, they're not participating, the board president should be calling out to some degree, like, hey, what do you think about this? they're leading the meeting by making sure that everyone's participating. If there's anyone who's overbearing or manipulative or just not being a very good board member in a more aggressive sense, again, and this isn't easy a lot of times, but the board president is the one who says, okay, hold on. Okay, this is not the way that our meeting should be going, right? We all agreed to be respectful to each other, which you should have done in your, board agreement, that you are going to be respectful to everybody. And we need to stop for a second and reevaluate. Okay, the board president should be able to step in and do that. Okay, that's their job. They have the authority to do that in the room if that happens. Okay, so the board president is conducting the meeting, following the agenda, sticking to things. The other big thing that often happens is discussions happen, right? And there's talking, there's going back and forth. And then it kind of fades and there's no vote. Okay, you don't want that to happen. It's so easy to have that happen. I don't know why, but it is. Okay, so if you're discussing something and you need to actually take a vote on it, like a decision needs to be made, the board president, again, is responsible to say, okay, we've talked about this for 25 minutes. We've heard from everybody. And it sounds like we've, discussed everything. Now it's time. We're going to take a vote. Okay, would anyone like to make a motion? And then somebody, probably someone who has a strong opinion on it, is say, I motion that we extend our lease for another year in this building. I think that's the best thing for us to do. And then the president says, okay. They can say all in favor, say aye. They can say, if you agree, raise your hand, whatever you want to say, right? And you actually take a vote and the secretary types it up, okay? And if someone doesn't want to vote, they could say, I withhold my vote, or they just don't raise their hand or whatever. Yeses and nos, the secretary should be recording this, but you take a vote so that it's recorded. Yes, there was a majority vote or there was a 2/3 vote, whatever your bylaws say, to pass a motion, okay? Once that decision's made, it's written down. Now, the secretary should also put an action item. Does anything need to happen? Does somebody need to go? Does somebody? Who is it? And what needs to happen? Okay, and who's going to do it? So, does someone need to reach out to the building and propose a renewed contract? Does there need to be a meeting? And who's going to do it? Secretary writes that down. Okay, so that all gets done. You finish up your meeting. If there was anything else that needs to happen, the secretary can write that too in the meeting minutes, right? And say, we're going to have a finance committee, or we're going to have an ad hoc committee. We got to find someone to chair the committee and talk about this item that needs to be taken care of, okay? All written down in the meeting minutes. Again, it's not a word for word or anything like that. It's just summary of what's happening, any votes, any action items in the meeting minutes. Then, and it should all be dated and all of that. Okay, and then when the meeting is over, the minutes should be sent to all of the board members, all right? And they should have that on file, okay? And again, organizationally, make sure that it's not in personal emails and personal drives and all of that, because then stuff gets hard to access and, locked up with a particular person. Make sure it's sent to maybe a shared drive folder or something, emailed to everybody. They all have it. They know what they're supposed to do. Now, again, if there's a board member who's supposed to go take care of something, it's not at all a bad idea for the board president to say, okay, I'll follow up with you on that, in a couple weeks, and make sure that we got that meeting scheduled. And then they do it. Okay, so the board president holds a lot of responsibility in making sure stuff happens in meetings and between meetings, possibly with the board members. The director shouldn't have to nag the board members in between meetings. They can send reminders and stuff like that, but they shouldn't have to feel like, oh, they said they were going to do it, and then I sent them a text and they never get back to their text, and then I sent them called them and left a voicemail, and they said they were going to get back to me, and then they haven't, and now I've bothered them 3 times, and maybe I should just do it myself, or I'm worried about the deadline, and that's so stressful. It burns you out so fast to be a director or a founder in that position. And then sometimes you're like, well, I don't want to bother them. They're volunteers. I know they're busy. But so as a board member, you have to make sure that you do what you say you're going to do. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, right? You want to make sure you say what you're going to do what you say. And then the director shouldn't have to do much more than remind you, okay? So your start in time, you end in time. You make sure you take votes. You make sure the minutes are taken and sent out. You make sure the agenda is out. You have some accountability. You have a calendar for the year that says the cycle of onboarding, of evaluation, of compliance, of planning, and you have some committee meetings in between. And again, those should also be conducted, but they're just in an orderly way, but they're more focused, right, on a particular thing that needs to happen. Usually a finance committee is something that should be happening possibly monthly, but that might be a lot. It depends on what your staffing is. At least a few times a year, they should be going through the financial transparency practices, actually going through and looking at things, and also a planning budget, okay? Because again, stability is the board's job. They should be supporting the staff and making sure those things happen. If the taxes aren't sent in, if the new board members aren't trained, if there's paperwork isn't sent in, it's not the director's fault legally. It's the board's fault, okay? Fault. Sounds like an accusatory term, but it comes back to the board. They're the ones responsible, okay? And again, this is because a board is the one that is legally governing the organization. The founder didn't start an LLC, okay? If they did that, they'd have all this responsibility, but they'd also have all the profit, right? That's why it's a nonprofit, okay? Hopefully those tips help you with how to format your board meetings. Remember, don't get into operations. Make sure you have agendas starting on time. You've got a strong president who knows what their job is, and you're orderly in your meetings, so you're not wasting time, and you also have accountability, and that will save you a lot of time if you just format like that from the beginning. And one more thing, I wanted to jump back to something I said earlier about operations. If you are in the very early stages where you just don't have a lot of staff yet, or maybe you're not even getting paid as a director yet, and this board is the only people you have to help you with operational stuff, what I really suggest doing is going through what we just talked about as far as a calendar and governance meetings that are your board meetings, and then separately having operational meetings that are focused on operations. And if the board members or some of the board members, even if you have it like right after your board meeting because everyone's in the same room already, that you very distinctly draw a line between the governance board meeting, it ends, and then if you just need help with the operations, you say, okay, we finished our board meeting, governance part is over, but you guys agreed to help me with this operational stuff this first year, because remember, this should end up becoming staff jobs. Operations should be staff jobs, okay? But this first year, you stop the meeting. Okay, now the founder takes over from the president and says, let's say it's, the next hour after the end of the board meeting, or it's a separate meeting, maybe in between the board meetings or something. And you stick to operations now. You say, I really need help figuring this curriculum plan out, or I need help with interviews, or whatever. I need someone to go with me to the building. I need someone to help me set up the classroom. All the stuff that staff should be doing is operational stuff. If your board is helping with that, just separate the meetings, make sure everyone understands that they're just doing this, one, that they're willing to do it. Okay, you should be asking them ahead of time. Don't rope them in just because they showed up for a board meeting and they think they signed up for a board meeting and now you're staying an extra hour and hey, can you guys help me with operations? Just don't do that, because it can wear out your board members if they don't know that they signed up for it, okay? So when you're recruiting the board members, if you want to then reach out and say, guys, in this first year, I really need help with operations and I don't have any staff yet. And so can you guys let me know which of you would be willing to put in a little extra time to help me as an advisory operational committee? Just call them a committee probably. And then figure out the best time for them to meet so that they know they're signing up for it. And if there's someone can only do the board governance part and then they leave at the end of the meeting or they don't attend the operational part, and now the director conducts that meeting and it's just operational. It's not governance. Okay. Just separate it and make sure that the people who are there signed up to be there and they know the distinction between the two things. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.